You lived an entire life before the age of 3. You were born. You opened your eyes for the very first time. You heard your mother's voice, tasted your first meal, took your first steps, and spoke your first word. Yet somehow, you remember none of it. Not a single moment. Most people assume the explanation is obvious. Your brain simply wasn't developed enough. You were too young to remember. But the truth is far stranger than that. Your infant brain wasn't failing to record your experiences. In fact, it was capturing them remarkably well. Those memories existed. Something else erased them. In 1905, Sigmund Freud became the first person to give this mystery a name. He called it infantile amnesia. Today, we know something Freud never could. Babies are capable of forming memories. This isn't speculation. It's been demonstrated repeatedly in scientific research. During the 1980s, psychologist Carolyn Rovee-Collier at Rutgers University designed a deceptively simple experiment. She tied a ribbon from a baby's ankle to a mobile suspended above the crib. It didn't take long for the babies to discover that kicking their legs made the mobile dance overhead. They quickly learned the connection, and they loved it. When the same babies returned days later, something remarkable happened. Without any prompting, they immediately began kicking again. They remembered exactly how the mobile worked. Even babies only 2 months old could retain that memory for several days, while 6-month-olds remembered it for weeks. So infant brains can learn. They can store information. They can even retrieve it. Yet by the time we reach adulthood, every trace of those earliest memories has disappeared. For decades, scientists struggled to understand why. Part of the answer lies deep inside the brain. Buried beneath the surface sits a small curved structure called the hippocampus, the engine responsible for forming memories. It transforms everyday experiences, a birthday party, a meaningful conversation, or a walk through the rain, into episodes you can later revisit in your mind. In adults, the hippocampus works closely with the prefrontal cortex to organize, store, and retrieve those experiences. Together, they create the autobiographical memories that define our lives. But in infants, this system is still under construction. The communication pathways linking the hippocampus to the cortex are only beginning to form. Critical regions, including the dentate gyrus, which acts as a gateway for creating new memories, don't become fully functional until roughly 2 to 4 years of age. That means your infant brain could create short-term memories, but it struggled to convert them into the durable long-term memories an adult brain can preserve. Yet even that explanation tells only part of the story, because what researchers discovered next was even more surprising. In 2014, neuroscientists Sheena Jocelyn and Paul Franklin at Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children proposed an idea that sounded almost impossible. What if the very process that allows a baby's brain to grow is also the process that erases its earliest memories? Their reasoning centered on something called neurogenesis. During the first years of life, the hippocampus produces enormous numbers of brand new neurons. This rapid burst of growth is essential. Those fresh brain cells build the networks that will support learning, reasoning, and memory for the rest of your life. But there may be a hidden cost. Every new neuron that becomes part of an existing circuit slightly reshapes that circuit. If enough new neurons continue arriving, the original connections can become disrupted, including the fragile connections storing newly formed memories. To test this possibility, Jocelyn and Franklin conducted a series of experiments using mice. When they artificially increased neurogenesis in adult mice, the animals began forgetting tasks they had already learned. But when they slowed neurogenesis in infant mice, those young mice retained their memories significantly longer than they normally would. The findings, published in the journal Science, pointed toward an astonishing conclusion. Your baby brain wasn't incapable of remembering because it was too weak. It was forgetting because it was growing too quickly. The same explosion of neurons that constructed your developing brain was constantly rewriting the circuits that stored your earliest experiences. Those memories weren't lost because they failed to exist. They disappeared because the architecture holding them was continuously being rebuilt. And as strange as that sounds, it still wasn't the whole story. There was still one missing piece, and it may be the most fascinating of all. To create what scientists call an autobiographical memory, the kind where you are the central character, reliving an event from your own life, you need something that most adults never stop to think about. You need a sense of self. You must recognize that you exist as an individual, separate from everything around you, and that experiences are happening to you. Developmental psychologists Mark Howe and Mary Courage argued during the late 1990s that this missing sense of self is one of the biggest reasons our earliest memories disappear. Before roughly 18 to 24 months of age, infants don't fully recognize themselves as distinct individuals. One of the best-known demonstrations of this is called the mirror test. Researchers place a small dot of rouge on a baby's nose before sitting them in front of a mirror. Babies younger than about 18 months usually treat the reflection as though it's another child. They smile, wave, or stare with curiosity, but they don't reach for the mark on their own face. Then something remarkable happens. After about 18 months, many children begin touching their own noses instead. They realize that the reflection isn't someone else, it's them. That seemingly simple moment marks one of the most important turning points in human development. It closely matches the age at which autobiographical memories begin to emerge. In other words, one reason you can't remember being a baby is that there wasn't yet a stable you to remember those experiences. Not in the way you understand yourself today. There was no inner narrator, weaving events into a personal story, belonging to someone called you. That realization leads to an unsettling question. If your earliest experiences belonged to a mind that lacked a continuous sense of self, and if the brain that stored those experiences was physically rewired beyond recognition, then is the baby smiling in your family photographs really you? Or was that, in a meaningful sense, someone entirely different? Someone who occupied the same body but whose mind was gradually dismantled and rebuilt, neuron by neuron, into the person reading these words today. There's one final piece to this puzzle: language. Developmental psychologist Catherine Nelson spent years investigating how children develop lasting memories. Her research suggested that language doesn't merely describe our memories, it gives them structure. Before you learned to speak, your experiences existed as raw sensations. The warmth of sunlight, the sound of laughter, the texture of a blanket, the comfort of being held, the taste of food, the emotion of safety or fear. These moments were real, but without language, they lacked an organized framework that could preserve them over time. Everything begins to change once children start speaking. More importantly, it changes when adults begin talking with them about the past. Questions like, "Do you remember when we went to the park?" or "Remember your birthday?" encourage children to organize experiences into stories. Those conversations strengthen the brain's ability to preserve memories for years instead of days. Language gives memory its framework. Without it, experiences resemble water poured into open hands. Real for a moment, impossible to keep. This idea is supported by research from psychologist Qi Wang at Cornell University. Her studies reveal that the age of a person's earliest memory isn't universal. It depends in part on the culture in which they grow up. In many Western cultures, parents frequently encourage children to tell stories about themselves. They ask questions, revisit family events, and help children build detailed personal narratives. As a result, people's earliest memories often begin around 3.5 years of age. Among the Maori of New Zealand, where oral storytelling and family history hold extraordinary cultural importance, average first memories stretch back even further, to around 2.5 years old. In contrast, several East Asian cultures tend to place less emphasis on individual childhood narratives and more on shared family experiences. There, people's earliest memories often begin closer to 4 years of age or even later. The culture surrounding you doesn't simply influence what you remember. It can shape how far back your memory reaches. So what really happened to the first years of your life? Your hippocampus wasn't yet mature enough to preserve lasting memories, like an adult brain. As it continued developing, a massive wave of new neurons constantly rewired the circuits, holding your earliest experiences. At the same time, you hadn't yet developed a stable sense of self to anchor those experiences into a personal identity. And without language, those experiences lacked the narrative structure needed to survive the passage of time. It wasn't one single cause. It was all of them working together. Every human being who has ever lived has passed through this same invisible chapter. Every person you've ever met carries a silent void where the first years of life should have been. And perhaps that's the most extraordinary part of all. The reason you can't remember being a baby isn't because your brain was too simple. It's because it was accomplishing something far more remarkable than remembering. It was building the person you would eventually become. To create the mind you have today, your brain had to sacrifice the one that came before. The child in those earliest years didn't simply disappear from memory. In a very real sense, that child became you.